The story I'm reading today is, it's an old story in as much as that the animals came to us some time ago. And this is a story about a group of female macaque monkeys. And their plight was pretty horrible before they came to wildlife rescue. And since they came to us so long ago, a lot has happened in their lives, and some of them have died since then because, again, the story was written quite some time ago. But let me tell you their story, and then we will move on to questions, and y'all can ask me any questions you like about them. The story is titled The Grand Old Girls. How many times in our lives are we faced with the opportunity, or perhaps a better word is challenge, of making what is decidedly a difficult decision? In the world of not-for-profit animal protection, these decisions usually consist of issues that deal with such things as which medication is best for a particular illness, when is an animal ready to be set free, and who will be able to adapt to a life of captivity. Then there are those decisions that make us step back and ask the question that goes to the very heart of why we are here. WRR learned from Craig Brestrup, then director of the Association of Sanctuaries, that there were 23 rhesus macaque monkeys in a lab in Michigan who were either going to be retired to sanctuary or put to death. The day we received the call, we were told that the monkeys had only 2 weeks to live and that we had to make our decision now. The image of 23 mostly elderly female primates who'd lived out their days isolated in small lab cages, enduring heaven knows what, and now facing imminent death was not an easy one to shut out. I knew we had nowhere to put them. I knew we were in the middle of organizing 2 major fundraising events, and I knew we already had plenty of needy animals to care for, but the image of these old girls would not go away. It seemed to me it was time for one of those fortunately familiar leaps of faith. So I called the technician at the lab and told her we would make the commitment to taking the girls, but we would need a little more than 2 weeks to prepare. Being the primary person in the lab who was lobbying for the monkeys' release, she was thrilled. After faxing all the necessary paperwork to prove that Wildlife Rescue would provide a good home for the girls, we were accepted as the monkey sanctuary. Now the fun began. Planning not only how to, but also where to house the new residents was going to be a challenge. These girls had never been together in the lab. Their lives had been made up of years of solitude, no touch except when they were being taken from their cages for an experiment, no time or opportunity to establish what is vital for non-human primates, solid relationships with other monkeys. So with the collective talent of WRR staff managers, we devised a plan for relatively small and temporary housing that would allow us to slowly introduce the girls and at the same time have them out of doors, unlike their over 20 years of life in a lab where they had been housed in a basement. The construction underway, it was now time to figure out how to transport monkeys from Michigan to Kendalia. We moved forward with the invaluable help of WR's friends and volunteers, David Seelig, who then lived in Boston, Don Barnes from San Antonio, and James Bias, the then director of the Bexar County Humane Society. A transport van from the Humane Society was secured and made ready. WRR staff members Tim Ajax and Shamias Moskowski drove to the Humane Society to pick up the van and outfit it with the necessary caging. WRR intern Kathleen Reardon accompanied David Seelig, and they were ready when the day arrived for their cross-country journey that would end with the 23 monkeys here in Kendalia. In only a matter of days, the girls were here. It was late in the evening when they arrived, so they had to spend their first night in their transport carriers. But early the next morning, WR staff was ready to move the new monkeys into their temporary housing. It was obvious by their behavior that these girls had been isolated long enough. So instead of placing them alone and giving them time to get acquainted, we took a chance that they knew better than we did and placed the girls in 3 groups. None of us can begin to imagine what 20+ years of solitary confinement are like. We cannot imagine being deprived of the touch of our own kind, or what it is like to live most of your life without even a visit out of doors into the outside world of fresh air and warm sunshine. This was the life endured by millions of animals used in research every single day. Until now, this was the life for these endearing female monkeys as well. As they emerged from their carriers, some were cautious and others darted out anxious to see what new sights surrounded them. But one emotion was common in each pair of curious and frightened eyes. Each female rhesus knew that her life was now quite different. Each old girl sensed that perhaps this was not a place to be afraid. The profound change had taken place, that something here was very different indeed. How long had it been since their acute sense of smell detected something other than an antiseptic kind of clean? How far back did their memories have to reach to recall the sounds of birds singing in the trees? Did each of them instantly recognize the soft feel of a warm summer wind as it caressed their faces that years before had only felt pain of the lab tattoos? As they looked around them, all the girls could see were oak trees and acres of green grass punctuated by rocks and bushes. Grasshoppers and cicadas chirped and called. Axis deer meandered past, sniffed at the new monkeys, and moved on. Resident cows and sheep dropped by to see who was occupying the new enclosure. All of these new sights, sounds, animals, and sensations were now part of their world. But most important is the newness of having another monkey to touch, to groom, to sometimes chase and fuss with, to sit and sleep next to be comforted by, to reassure, to finally, after years of solitude, share a day and a night with. What began as a reluctant decision to offer our help has now become a mission to create a truly perfect home for the new monkeys. For now, the girls have their temporary enclosures, but as with all animals coming to WRR, so much more is necessary. We must build for these monkeys what we will be building for all primates living at the new sanctuary. Thanks to the donations we've received, a 1-acre enclosure surrounding an oak grove is in the monkeys' future. As they settle in, the female rhesus must know that the sanctuary is their final home. Non-human animals live in constant touch with their deepest sense of knowing. Now, these old girls who have been through so much look out from their new dwellings and see only peaceful surroundings. Never again will an approaching human be a harbinger of fear. Never again will they be tattooed or restrained. There will be no more days of darkness. From this moment forward, their lives will be that of cherished, respected guests. They will be cared for and loved. They will be seen only as dear, gentle ones they are. No longer are they tools for research, for finally they have been brought home. Finally, their work is done, but most importantly, their suffering is over. So, as I said in there, this is an old story, and you can, I was talking about how we still needed to raise the funds to build their enclosure. I'm happy to say this, years ago we did that for them. What we did learn also about these girls was that they were all related. We didn't know it at the time. As we started going through their paperwork, we found out that they were grandmothers, mothers, sisters, daughters, and nieces to one another. They'd never been able to be together, never been able to be together. The lab cages they lived in were in one building, so they could hear each other. They could sometimes see each other, but that was it. I will tell you that the day that we put them into the new 1-acre enclosure, and it was the first enclosure that we built at the new sanctuary, again, this was back in 2000, 2003, they ran out of the carriers, and most of them ran to each other and just grabbed each other and just held on. They just held on. They never do that. They never even been able so much to touch fingertips, and now they had each other to hug and to hold on to, and they did it. And it took them a while to stop embracing. Not that we pushed it, they did it on their own terms. But that day was quite a day for them and quite a day for us. It also reminded us what all of us, I think, who care about animals know, and that is they are incredibly intelligent, sentient, wonderful beings for whom we give so little credit. for having all the things that we call human emotions. These emotions that are not human emotions alone by any means. Over the years, because the girls were older when they came to us, they did pass away bit by bit. Most of them developed cancer. But their last years were in an acre of land with trees that they would always climb up into. And they had a big above ground pool. They had a play set all their own with a big slide. We just gave them everything we could think of that they might like. And there's, I think, 3 of them still remaining now. So it was quite a story, and is quite a story for any animals who we get in, who we rescue from situations where they're just being treated so horribly. And these girls were quite special. So does anybody have anything they'd like to comment or questions they'd like to ask me about that? We never know that. We know so little about, when we get primates out of laboratories, we're told very little. It's even remarkable when we're given their health history, frankly. It's more remarkable when we're told what's been done to them. And, you know, sometimes we don't want to know if there's nothing we need to do to further, you know, care for them in ways that can kind of undo the harm that's been done to them. But no, we had no knowledge of the males. We will never know. We just didn't know. It was an interesting thing. Usually we do keep monkeys apart for a while because you don't know who's going to get along. They're they're very complex beings. But what I said in here was that we could tell that they'd been isolated long enough is because when we had them in the transport carriers, they were reaching out trying to touch each other then. They weren't doing any kind of the threat postures or anything like that. And they were calling to each other in these very gentle words that when you worked around a lot of primates, you understand some of their language. Yeah. And the space that we built, even though the temporary space it was very large compared to where they were, but it wasn't an acre yet. But getting them into 3 groups originally did turn out to be the right thing to do. I will say there was one girl who was particularly elderly, and she didn't get into the group really well. So we did end up keeping her by herself, but only because right around the same time, about several months later, we took in 2 baby rhesus who'd been, victimized by the so-called pet trade for wild animals. And they needed a mother. Oh. And she adopted both of them. And then she adopted a teenage rhesus who we took in a year later. So she became this matriarch of a whole other little group of her own. And these girls were, they were old, poor babies. They were old. Some of them were balding and just, I don't know. I always, it doesn't matter how long I work around animals and in service to them. I am still always so awestruck by how strong they are. I look at our species and we are always bitching and moaning and complaining and, poor us. And, these animals go through living hell. We just can't even imagine it. And yet they just keep going. They just say, damn it, I'm going to stay alive and I'm going to do what I can to enjoy what I now have. And for the most part, they just don't look back. Some of them, it's harder for them to make the adaptation to being, to be calm and to not be afraid anymore. But even they keep eating. They'll lie out in the sunshine. They'll climb up in trees. They don't just sit and mope and feel sorry for themselves. You just don't see that in the non-human animal kingdom. Yeah, they have a strong sense of connection. I believe the reason for that is that they have such a strong sense of the connection that we all have, but that they're aware of, to the oneness in the universe and to the earth itself, that is so powerful for them that it just doesn't let them say, okay, I'm going to give up. Labs don't make those kind of agreements as a rule, frankly. We have taken animals from there over the years. We've taken marmosets from there and rhesus from there. But the closest we have found that we can get to is generally with labs at universities. Brown University right now, we're working with them to get an older male out of there. We work with Princeton, and Princeton and Brown and Columbia and UT, just a lot of universities around the country, because most of them have labs with monkeys in them and other animals. So they're usually a little bit more flexible, but I have to tell you that when I said in this story that I had to talk to them about whether wildlife rescue was a good enough home for them or not, this is what you get. You get the people at the lab saying, well, what kind of housing are you going to provide for them? All they've done is put them in lab cages, 2x2 stainless steel boxes, but they want, and on the one hand, it's good. They want to know that they're going to do the right thing. But there's a little bit of arrogance there, because clearly we're going to do a whole lot better in how we house these animals than a lab has any real interest in doing. So no, there's been no agreements with any of them that's any legally binding agreements anyway. Well, I mean, that's it. People in prison probably have a sense, but even we who are sheltering in place and all, we have houses and yards. Monkeys have a 2.5 by 2.5 box, But yeah, captivity is captivity. I mean, obviously, where animals concerned, they have no choice in the matter at all, and that's kind of the key fundamental difference there for them, is they don't get to say anything about it. I'll be honest with you, I don't even spend a whole lot of time thinking about it. I've had inside information about labs for a long time, because people who have worked there have come to me after getting out of there, and fortunately or unfortunately giving me a lot of the gory details, and I cannot imagine the number of animals who are being put through hell right now because of this virus. I mean, it's numbers none of us who care about animals would even want to know, frankly. Well, so first of all, we never think of them or call them lab animals, because there is no such animal as a lab animal. There are certainly animals in labs, and it sounds like semantics, but it's a very important distinction. And I know a lot of people will say circus elephants and zoo animals. It's really important for those of us who care about animals to always refer to where they're being kept, not as if that's the place they belong, because that is not where they belong. They are animals in labs, and we're contacted whichever the lab is, be it a university or a private independent, we're contacted when they want to dump the animals. That's when we're contacted. And sometimes we get a call a month or a few months. Sometimes we won't hear for months at all. It just depends on what they're doing to them and when they're ready to get rid of them.